So I see everyone is more or less settled. I'm Balint Penzes, and I just would like to present my recent research together with IC, which was published last December, and it's about how blockchain can be used in the construction industry and improve productivity. So the system, or how I will go through the topic, is first to introduce some of the pain points, which I believe all of you are very much aware. Then describe a few use cases. Some of them are very targeted for the industry, some of them fairly general, around three main topics. One is payment and project management, the other one procurement supply chain, and at the end BIM and smart asset management. And then some of the challenges and future work. So some of the pain points, I don't need to introduce blockchain, I believe. So I will just give a pretty easy example, which is, for instance, a labor enters to site with its verified ID. And based on the entering and exiting, I think it's an example from IBM as well, the worked hours and how much hours was spent on the site is just registered on a blockchain. So as soon as it's registered, a smart contract, so the self-executable contract, can basically trigger payments or trigger notifications or just update everyone's that this accounting book is updated based on the hours. And then blockchain basically can act as a single source of truth. So nice and easy, and gives immediately some of the benefits, which means it's accurate because you don't have redundant systems, you don't have 3 or 4 timesheets, because when I worked in a joint venture, I had 3 to fill out, and I made mistakes time to time. And I get really embarrassing emails and of course problems in the accounting books. Again, transparency, because everyone used the same source, so I don't really have to explain why it's transparent for the parties who are involved. Then cost efficient, because again, referring back to a joint venture, we had a large number of project controls and project managers who just basically tried to coincide these different resources and the different books to find the right number of hours and who paid for who. And collaboration. And what I mean under collaboration is more like contractual collaboration. And basically with these smart contracts you can put into life a contract, and it's not just a paper existing in the background, but actually it's actively managed through the whole system. So why we need it? The industry is fragmented. The supply chain is really complex, sometimes more than 700 participants in the supply chain for Crossrail, for just one station. And it's many times inefficient, even though this is the second biggest industry in the world. And one of the main issues is late payments, because even though we have a robust structure in place, many times it's not followed, and it's hard to actually force contractors or massive contractors to actually release payments in 30 days. But because of this, some statistics. In the recent 5 years, PwC showed that more than 75% of the projects were over budget, just enough to think about Crossrail. For instance, 20% of these reasons were about errors in the project governance or simply in the administration. And then the average margin in the industry is 1.5%, and I believe I don't have to say that doesn't really help for innovation and research and development. And it's particularly dangerous for an industry where almost 20% of the participants are actually small and medium-sized enterprises. So they are usually in danger. And just in 2016, there was a 27% increase in late payments and unfair payments, which means basically another fact that out of 250 small and medium-sized companies, they said 97% said that they experienced late payments, which means more than 30 days, sometimes 87 days. So you can feel how much risk they took when they had to progress with the job and they still didn't get paid. So the first example, payment and project management. So just imagine you are in your project planning phase and you set up your team, your deliverables, you have what you have to design, your milestones and approval system, and of course you have a system in place how you will progress, how you will monitor progress. Now imagine that you have an underlying blockchain platform where all these information are set up. Some of the milestones are in smart contracts, some of them just simply It's just simply a need that you have to put on the blockchain. And what it means that all the contractual terms in terms of deliverables, or if it's a stage gate process in the design, are still implemented in the blockchain system. So what it means, for instance, when you submit your design or a design package, basically the fact of submission is recorded, but also with a lot of metadata, which designer or engineer interacted during the development of design, when was it signed off, who signed it off, the number of hours worked, and so on. At the end, the submission is made, and the smart contract can update some key KPIs and just monitor the progress. And the benefits, again, cost and time savings. The contractual terms are actually fairly active because the blockchain system and the smart contracts, let's say, safeguard it. It can enhance quality because all the quality assurance procedures are basically necessary, otherwise a smart contract won't allow you to progress. It can make an accounting easier, especially if it's time and material based, and also give a chance for automatic reporting. And as a kind of side effect, you can have real-time project control and better control on cost and schedule. So some use cases. Just imagine an integrated project and document control system. And this is just a very general example for a design submission or design package submission, similar that I just explained. So you have the package, you have the deliverable, and you assign during a submission a lot of metadata which is recorded in the blockchain, like all the QAs, all the number of hours worked, who signed off and when, and all the design specifications which usually are hidden somewhere in the background of the package. Now the smart contract what can do is just simply go through all these aspects, and when all the boxes are ticked off, it can release payments or just release an invoice. At least the fact will happen and it will be recorded, and also update the program and the KPIs that you need. So a bit of automation in the project control. It can minimize misalignments and issues, enhance productivity, and again save money on administration. Some of the examples, well, as we heard, actually, Autodesk moves towards this direction, but there's a startup, Zeus ecosystem, who tries to implement this solution on blockchain. Another example is a crane operational risk management system. It's again a kind of integrated health and safety and risk management system. Many times on sites, cranes are quite crucial to use them effectively. Their operation is quite, let's say, it's usually on the critical path, but also there are a number of health and safety risks associated. So imagine if you have a few sensors in place, one on the top measuring wind speed, the other one is just the weight of the lifted object. When certain thresholds are met, a smart contract trigger a safety alarm for the crane operator and the project manager. And you may say, actually, you don't need blockchain here. It's true. In fact, the other aspect of the system, that all these facts, meaning the threshold was reached and then a safety alarm was sent to the project manager, are all recorded on a blockchain. So it's immutable, and then every participant is accountable, which is, in terms of health and safety, is a pretty important aspect. And there are a few examples out there. For example, LifeChain from Costain. They are working with the same fundamental. And the Be Sure project, who is actually tries to put a health and safety record and assurance system on the level of individuals on its global platform. So it's worth to check them. The second use case, I think most of you are very much aware, procurement and supply chain. So as I said, in the industry is as a really fragmented part of the business. And many people already mentioned provenance for materials, and I believe I don't have to remind anyone about the tragedy of Grenfell Tower. And just imagine if you could have a kind of transparent system which could show basically the inefficiency of the fire safety, or let's say the missing fire safety specifications for the cladding, which caused a lot of problems there. So in general, we have the raw material, and on an underlying blockchain system, we can register the origin of this material or the suppliers. As you go forward with the fabrication or the fabrication time and the related quality standards, During transportation, you track delivery, invoices, and when it arrives to site and the contractor takes it over, basically all the necessary quality assurance processes can be, I would say, lively linked to these construction materials, and also the construction specifications or design specifications. At the end, it gives confidence for the client at any point in the supply chain what's happening with the material, what's the quality. So just to summarize, quality assurance and also regulatory compliance, because I see more and more, or more often, that you have to actually demonstrate that your supply chain was regulatory compliant at any point during the construction procurement. So all these track and trace systems can give accountability and transparency, reducing risk because you can see through where certain elements coming from and who dealt with them. And also it led to significant cost and time savings. And ultimately the output is a chance to have a streamlined procurement and basically a chain of custody about the whole supply chain. One of the examples was already mentioned, together with IBM and Maersk. Their shipping platform is very similar than the Oracle shipping platform, basically following containers and attached to these containers all the supplementary documents, which I was surprised because when I talked with an IBM or a Maersk individual, he mentioned that many times they just fly over these documentations together with the containers, and sometimes these are thousands and thousands of pages. So just imagine, it's a good question, why was it not on a digital system? And finally, blockchain can basically solve this problem. But another, and maybe for us a more important pilot, is together with Tata Steel. And this pilot project is governed by the Construction Smart Contract Committee, some members from Arup actually, and IBM and SAP and so on. And the main idea is to create a blockchain system which lively links the supporting documents to steel products. In practice, it means that you have a unique ID, which is related to for example, a steel beam. And then based on this ID, you can follow the whole, let's say, life of this beam from the procurement until it's basically constructed or put in the structure, also until it's maybe reused or recycled. And how it works, as I just mentioned, this whole provenance of material is basically linked, so the supply chain information, but also together with the quality standards and design and construction specifications, transportation details and changes in ownership during the way, and also the carbon footprint and all these sustainability parameters to support a circular economy. So all of these, when they are in a common data environment, you basically end up with building information modeling and BIM. And the main idea here, or the main fundamental concept, is that BIM and blockchain has the shared ability to be the single source of truth. And how it can work is that imagine a BIM process, whether it's a model or just a data management process, it's basically a dashboard. And this dashboard can just pull data from a blockchain, and then these data, for instance, the provenance of materials or the payment details that I just mentioned before, is lively linked digitally to that specific element or for the whole building or for the whole infrastructure. So a simple example, this steel beam arrives to site, and then a smart contract automatically updates the model that this steel beam is now on site, so maybe another design or construction step can be taken forward. And then that's the next step. When the BIM model itself is updated, the fact that an update happened or a design change or something happened in the BIM model, that can also be progressed back down to the underlying blockchain solution and tracked and recorded. And the powerful element of this, that you can have a traceable record of design decisions according to the BIM model, which is really important when you actually would like to know what happened in the past, who modified the BIM model and what was modified. Ultimately, a really important output of this process can be the so-called digital twin, and that's the way how we end up with the smart asset management aspect. When a BIM model is updated continuously, and basically it reaches the as-built state, we can say this is now a digital copy of the infrastructure. I know it looks like a bit blue sky thinking, but imagine if all these data are assigned to a BIM model, and now it's a digital twin, the asset managers and all of those who are responsible for operation and maintenance can use all the data, which, for example, the governance of, or the origin of the materials or the design specifications, and based on these data, they can manage their own maintenance work. And in this way, when you do this maintenance, basically all of these data can also feed back to this digital twin, and in this way you can cover the whole life cycle of an asset. And for those kind of clients who are dealing with thousands of assets and infrastructures, to track their maintenance, to basically schedule the maintenance, and maybe do a preventive maintenance, because based on this digital twin they know a few years' time probably they have to be there and do some maintenance checking. It's really important to have such a digital system. And when blockchain underlines the system, it gives a high level accountability. So one of the use case, it's I just mentioned that it's really important to reach the as-built state. And I believe there are two problems here. Many times the BIM process is actually not at that level in the company where it's supposed to be. And many times this is the step which is missed, how you update the model to have the as-built state. And it's just an idea how you can incentivize this process, which is basically to create a BIM gateway process which is facilitated and safeguarded with smart contracts. And what I mean is that you have the construction site and our favorite steel beams, and as soon as it's positioned by the GPS coordinates, you can measure where it is, and you can basically say that now it's positioned. You update the BIM model, so we have now two information, one that the construction was done, and the other one that the BIM model was updated. These two information is recorded in the blockchain, also by who did these modifications. And then the smart contract can tick off the boxes and say, now you did your job, so I will release payments, I will update the necessary parties, or simply I will just order the following tasks, and you can step from one gateway to another one. Side effect again, you can have real-time data on site based on these continuous improvements and modifications, and also continuous project monitoring. Some of the examples, I'm happy that one was actually already mentioned, is BIMchain, who is working in this space actively, and also BIMobject, which is very much worth a look at, and I just don't have time to explain with more details now. So we heard about challenges, and yes, they are. It's an emerging technology and fairly new. There is also future work needs to be done. Some of the common challenges which were identified, you always hear regulatory uncertainties, also how to start, what are the cost implications, and the lack of governance in the space. But there are a few specific ones for our industry. Regulatory, obviously, because at the moment our construction design management framework is the most important framework, how you basically share the risk. So anytime if you would like to introduce such a system, you have to fit in, and that's a challenge. Project governance is something to think about, because always, or not always, but nowadays many times a complex capital project is set up in a really hierarchic way. So sometimes this technology can challenge that. Cultural challenges, because there are many legacy business procedures here, and of course that requires a cultural change sometimes. Narrow margin, as I mentioned. This industry is one of the worst in terms of research and development investments, so that's a challenge in itself. Knowledge sharing, because as we just heard, sometimes we have a project and you share some of your solutions, but you don't really want to share it because you are afraid that your intellectual property will be used somewhere else. But also these kind of innovations are really constrained within the project boundaries, and then it won't be used in a wider scale in the industry. Fragmentation, as I mentioned before, and simply just the different level of digitization in the industry. Some of the stages which may help to overcome these challenges, or at least discover them, and then go to the implementation phase, is applicability, collaboration, and pilot project. And what I mean under applicability is first you have to find the right business case and actually define, let's say, the problem before you want to have a solution. Then you have to do your feasibility study, the return on your investment, which is, according to a company, a blockchain solution. After a blockchain solution implementation, the return on investment is somewhere between 40 and 560%, which means you really have to dig into the bottom of it and define what's there, because it's a wide range. Engage your stakeholders, very important. Find actually KPIs that you would like to develop so you can measure how you progress in time, and then challenges and develop a proof of concept. Then a collaborative way to develop this business case is to do a kind of process mapping. So you have to see what is actually in place at the moment and try to map where are the gaps, where is a blockchain solution which can help within the procurement, within your supply chain, within your document control system, and then explain the future governance and start to engage those stakeholders who you need to. At the end, I believe there is a need to step back and just use a really small part of this identified business case or problem and introduce a pilot project. So basically you have time and less resources just to play around and have a first-hand experience. And also in this way you can measure progress according to those KPIs that you basically defined at the first place. You don't have to measure all of them, maybe just one of them, but the point is that you have a kind of chunky, short project where you can have first-hand implementation experience. And when all these boxes are ticked off, hopefully you are more on a kind of tailored way to apply a blockchain solution. So I hope I gave some ideas for thinking. If you are interested in more details, just check this report, which was published last year, and I'm more than happy to discuss further some of these ideas. And thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for your questions.
Hi, thanks for that. So a big part of the problem with a lot of the use, like especially when it comes to payments, is like the incentive structures that exist in the industry mean that a lot of the use cases that are often talked about are possibly not going to happen, or it's going to be a challenging journey, let's call it that. And in that same vein, what do you think about blockchain as an enabler for alternative project delivery models like alliancing and integrated project delivery? Where it might be better connected to the incentive structures of these. Yeah. So, thanks.
Very good observation. 2, good question. Payment is a tricky one, I admit that. And probably how the industry can use these solutions is to again step back, look what we have, and ask the question if that can be improved. So for instance, document control. I had a chance to look into some capital projects document control system, which is always in place, but it's really hard to actually measure or find who made decisions, when was it made, and also really hard to follow the project control itself, to measure progress, what was submitted, when was something modified, and when and who actually released that modification, and so on. So an incentivize here can be that if you use such a blockchain system, it gives accountability. Maybe some of the project participants won't like it, but the client deals with massive public money, and from that moment, it's an incentivize for the client. So probably there will be a push from his side. Another element here is that if you use such a system, you can have maybe a long timeline of all the decisions that you made during the project, but at least it's a single source. It's really auditable, and I don't mean that someone will come and audit your decisions. That can also happen if something goes wrong. But in the meantime, you can also go back and see where was the problem, what was its origin, and basically you can improve yourself, the project management or the construction itself, so you can save money, and maybe you can just not make the same mistake which was hidden before, now you know what happened and you won't make it again. I know it's maybe a bit blur explanation, but I think that's what I meant under this process mapping. There are a lot of processes at the time or in place at the moment where you can actually use this blockchain use case and you don't necessarily need to add an automatic payment. It can be simply an automatic notification in your calendar or updating the schedule. I hope I answered to your question.
I get the point about transparency and accountability. What about multiple standards? So taking the modular housing industry, for example, you've got the legal obligation, which is the same as traditional. You've then got the British Board of Agreement, you've then got BRE, BOPAS and the rest of them. Can you track several standards at once and so you have a complete record? So where the standards are evolving, you can still keep it and actually pull some of that regulation or standards better together so that there are no gaps.
Well, yeah. So I think what you ask is that, and correct me if I understood wrong. So when you have all these standards and you have in contract that you have to follow them, your question is there a mechanism with blockchain, smart contracts, whatever, to basically collide them and make sure that all of them is followed? Correct. All right. Conceptually, yes. That's what blockchain will do. In fact, I'm sure this is so complex at the moment, and also these standards many times talking about not the same thing, but still there is some interconnection. So I believe for a proper project, in real project, it's really hard to have a kind of rigid smart contract system which will make sure by default that you follow these standards. So I think the golden egg is not here. But what can be done is, again, it's simply a record which gives a massive and transparent accountability for those who are involved. So at least it can always demonstrate your steps and decisions which may help to be compliant with these standards. But to have an active system which can safeguard you, I wouldn't go that far.
Hi. I'm concerned that in our minds we're applying a very finite and definite idea, say, that you could apply to an iPhone, to a building. And I think I'd be interested to how you would regard this application of blockchain to an industry where everything really is much less accurate and is very different, and every building we do is pretty much a prototype, and even modular housing is not really as modular as everybody suggests. So, for instance, you're talking about getting an almost perfect as-built record of the building. How likely is that in reality? Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think you raise a really good point, because we try to be really accurate here, which can happen in the office, but of course to have then a physical asset which matches perfectly with the BIM model is really hard to get, and probably sometimes impossible. But still, the way how I see it, even if go back to the steel beam, if the position of that steel beam is not 100% correct, or you think there were actually some changes on site which is not recorded, and we couldn't simply capture it because the construction went forward and we couldn't follow it. I think the powerful chance here is still that you can have a lot of information from your supply chain that you can still add to a model. Even though if it's not the 100% correct position, it can be actually what was the origin of that beam and what was the steel of grade, or something like that. And when you deal with, for example, bridges, you have to maintain that bridge for 100 years, and there are clients who need to know what happened. And when there's a maintenance which happened way early than anyone anticipated, they can easily trace back what happened before, and it won't be on papers, it will be a digital model. And I think that can improve simply how you deal with maintenance, how you optimize things, because it can just simply unleash a lot of data which was already there, you just couldn't use it. I hope get closer to the answer.
question.
No, no.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.